You know, that euphoric, satisfied feeling you get when you beat the odds? When you suddenly find yourself up against a formidable contender, but plow along anyway, without really knowing or giving much thought as to what the end result might be. That's the type of true story I've got for you today. Back in 1969, several of us guys, just starting high school, got together and started a disc jockey club. The idea was to play records in the lunchroom during lunch periods to what would be a pretty much captive audience. While that was our main thing, our mission soon expanded into a couple of other areas, and it's one of these that we'll talk about today. Periodically, I think it was usually once a month, the student council would sponsor a dance. There would either be a live band, or the DJ club would play records. Now back then, being a disc jockey, even commercially, was quite different than today. Not much in the way of effects or special lighting. About the most complex lighting thing might be to dim the house lights for a slow dance, but even this was only if the venue itself was equipped for this. It was all about the music, and this was of course long before digital technology. The tech of the day in the 1960s and 70s was records, the discs in disc jockey. Today we sometimes use the term vinyl, but I don't remember that terminology being used back then. Disc jockeys from local radio stations were often hired for wedding receptions, dinners, and dances at teen hangouts, and for hosting dance shows on TV, but even then the setup was pretty simple. So for one particular Friday night dance at our school, a band was scheduled to perform. But a day or two before the dance, us DJs got a frantic phone call from someone in charge saying that the band had canceled at the last minute and could we be there to play records. Okay, we can do that, we replied. Now, these dances were held in the same room at the school that was used for lunch periods. It was a large, long room with foldable dividers that could make it into 3 smaller rooms if needed. But most of the time, especially for lunch and dances, the room was left completely open. Along one wall were doorways to several smaller rooms, including the teacher's lounge, workrooms, and storage rooms. So, 2 of us DJs, a friend and myself, show up the evening of the dance, early enough to set up, and lo and behold, the band is also there, having shown up anyway just a few minutes before us despite having canceled. So, what to do? Then somebody in charge apologizes to us for the mix-up, but could we set up anyway? The band isn't really that good, they added. Now, one thing that would normally be a problem is that the band was setting up right in the corner where we always set up our DJ stand, where there was a jack on the wall for us to tap into the overhead speakers in the drop ceiling. We had built a cart in woodshop on which we had mounted our tube amp tube because solid state or transistorized equipment was just coming onto the scene, and most commercial grade equipment still used tubes. A simple mixer combined the outputs from our 2 turntables that were mounted on the top of the cart, as well as that of a microphone. The cart was on casters. We kept it in a small adjacent storage room and rolled it out to use it. We could roll that cart anywhere in the room, but we needed that wall connection to make use of the ceiling speakers. Fortunately, one of the guys in the group had just finished building 2 speaker columns. We had them with us for their debut that night. The plan was to use these in conjunction with the overhead speakers at these dances, but thought maybe they would be adequate by themselves in a pinch, and this was that pinch. So we set up at the opposite end of the room from the band, and the band began playing. And their sound was pretty bad, mainly due to their speaker setup. They were using a couple of huge beat-up metal horn speakers that had been retired from the football stadium of a neighboring school district. They had many layers of paint on them that was chipping off, and they were full of dents. And they weren't really made for this type of use, that is, for a band, to begin with. A few minutes later, we powered up and began playing records. It wasn't long before people started asking if we could turn our sound up louder. Our new homemade speaker systems turned out to be not very efficient and didn't play as loud as we would have liked, but we forged on, pushing them as hard as we could. Then we started getting song requests. Turns out the band, besides not being very good, didn't know a lot of the songs people wanted to hear. but everyone knew what records we had since we had been playing them in days just prior during lunch. While some of us DJs would bring in some of their own records, most of our record library was shared, and we had all of those records on hand. We had an account at a small record shop at a local mall that the student council funded, so we would periodically stock up on the latest popular records, some 45s and some LPs. So the crowd that initially were mostly situated toward the band's end of the room began drifting towards our end of the room. There was a cacophony of sound in the room, as you might imagine, coming from both the band and DJs playing records at the same time. But after the crowd pretty much abandoned them, the band finally gave up, packed up, and left. We finished out the evening and were the heroes for the night. In the days following, we sometimes wondered if the band, the members of which were all older and bigger than us, might cause some problems for us, but nothing ever came of it. So the winners were us two little guys, the mouse in today's video. We had overcome the 5 or 6 members of the band, or the cat, that had come out swinging with gloves on. And that was one of many stories I remember from simpler times way back in the 1960s and 1970s. A real Davey versus Goliath story. Special thanks to DigiCharmView for their boxing cat and mouse clip art used by permission in today's video.